In the previous episode, I did a very quick review of the model, dunked all the parts in hot soapy water and took to them with a Stanley knife and files. It's now time for priming. Normally we'll be using an acrylic primer, but because this model's been moulded using a plastic resin, we have to use an enamel primer. Here I've chosen an automotive enamel grey spray primer, but I've heard good results can also be had with brush-on enamel primers. This is the result of priming. It's a bit rough in spots as I've found it hard to control the spray can nozzle with any amount of finesse, as I'd either get too little of spray or too much. There are some spots where the primer has been applied too thickly and thus left some overspray paint ridges. This primer sort of melts into the plastic surface. As it's drying, I'm finding it harder to scratch off, which is a good thing. I'm applying quite a bit of force here in an attempt to scratch the paint off this surface. This spot is where glue will be applied later to fix the back tray to the tractor's chassis. I think the model is now ready for some airbrushing. The first layer is the dark shadow layer, and I'll be using AK Interactive's Dunkelgrau Shadow number AK1161 from the German Panzer grey paint modulation set. With the paint thoroughly shaken up, I put about 12 drops or so directly into the airbrush with no thinner. The compressor is set to about 22 psi. This layer is a very dark grey for deep shadows. It will be accentuated later in the build by a general black-brown wash followed by a black pin wash. The aim here is to evenly cover the entire model. Make sure you get right into the corners, cracks and crevices in the cab and the back tray. Note that I'm not using a technique used by scale modelers called pre-shading. That technique involves spraying the dark shadow colour into only those spots requiring dark shadowing, leaving the neutral grey primer colour everywhere else. The end result is that there's a bit more contrast between the highlights and shadows. The second layer is still a shadow layer, but this time we're not interested in the dark corners and undersides of the vehicles. I'll be using the AK Dunkelgrau base, number AK1163. You can see the lighter shade colour compared to the dark shadow colour we just sprayed. I've thoroughly shaken the paint bottle up and put about 12 drops again directly into the airbrush with no thinner. The compressor is still set to 22 psi. We want to spray most of the model again, laying even coats as we move around the model. Because this is still a shade colour, but it's not the darkest shade, we want to keep away from the deep corners and the underside where we'd expect these places to be deep in shadow. Don't concentrate on individual panels at this stage. The third layer is the vehicle's real base colour, and the acrylic I'll be using is the AK Dunkelgrau light base, number AK1164. You can start to see the progression of the layers now. Again, I've thoroughly shaken the paint bottle and put 12 drops directly into the airbrush with no thinner. The compressor is still set at 22 psi. We start to concentrate on the model panel by individual panel and working more towards highlighting those panels. Imagine how sunlight strikes those panels and highlight accordingly. It's easy to highlight the horizontal surfaces facing directly towards the sun, but the side panels won't receive as much light. Still, as this is the model's true perceived colour, I'll spray each panel on the sides of the vehicle but concentrate this towards the top half of the panel, leaving the bottom half also in shadow. Just remember, there's still another highlight to go. The final layer is a highlight layer, for which I'm using the AK Dunkelgrau highlight number AK1165. This highlight is quite a light grey colour. I haven't put as many drops into the airbrush this time, and again no thinner, as I don't think thinner is required for these paints. Now I'm concentrating more to the top third of each panel, but staying away from the shadow from the top lip around the back tray. I'll also add some highlight right in the middle of each panel, staying away from the edges. I'm aiming to layer this highlight over the top of the previous layer, staying away from the two shading layers. Pull on the trigger just enough to get tiny amounts of the highlight colour flowing. It's easier and more precise to work up the colour rather than have too much and needing corrective work.